Number 1.
So my boyfriend and I are big gamers, but since university has started back, we haven't been able to spend a lot of time together. Well, one Saturday, we had a plan to go to a flea market I'd heard about, and go game hunting, and spend the rest of the day playing together, like we had over the summer. When we were there, I found a classic Legend of Zelda cartridge, and knew I had to have it. I'm a giant Zelda fan. I know this sounds cliche, and you're expecting me to tell you the worker said I could just have it, but to not bring it back, with an odd tone in his voice. But that's not what happened. I paid for it and was told I had a week-long warranty, and if I found a problem with the game to bring it back, and I can have another game of equal or lesser value. After that, my boyfriend and I strolled around the flea market for fun, and he bought some beads that expanded in water. He said we could have a bead fight once they got big and squishy. When we got home, we popped the cartridge into my Nintendo and began to play. After 2 hours or so, we stopped and ate dinner at Red Robin's. When he dropped me off at home, he told me to go find some secrets in the game, but he was heading home for the night. When I turned on the Nintendo, I saw our file had been erased. I thought, great, its battery ran dry. I'll have to send it back when the flea market opens up again next Saturday. But to double check, I made a new file and saved it. Then I turned it off and back on. The file was still there. I sent my boyfriend a text telling him this, and he said he didn't mind restarting because it was only a new reason to spend another whole Saturday on my couch, spending time with his favorite person. So, I continue off with my day. The next day I come home, and the kitchen and bedroom lights are off. I usually leave those on for the dogs. I also found the tulip-scented wax that I put in my scent lamp splashed on my pillow. I called my mom to see if she had come home from work at any point in the day. She said she hadn't. So at this point I'm a little creeped out, but brushed it off. I mean, maybe I forgot to leave the lights on, right? So a few weeks go by, and things are pretty normal. Until one night I'm playing video games. Mom had a date, and she told me she wasn't coming home that night. So I'm playing my Xbox 360, and out of nowhere, I hear my dog yelp, and look over to see one of my Nintendo controllers had flown across the room, and hit my dog, who was hiding in the corner with the controller at her feet. That, I couldn't brush off with a possible reason. So I shouted, "If you're real, stop hurting my dogs, or I'm getting rid of the cartridge." And ever since then, the dogs haven't been hurt. But my door locks keep coming undone. The air conditioning switch keeps getting shut off. The TV will turn off. And if the door is cracked, it'll slowly be shut with a rough slam. Could this really be my game cartridge? Even though the spirit has calmed down, is this something that I should allow to continue?
Number 2.
My story actually begins a few months ago, when I decided to make a YouTube channel where I narrate scary stories. I seemed to know so many people who had a story to tell, so I went for it, and ended up with the name Creepy Battenberg. With the help of a good friend, I soon had stories coming in from around the world. Particularly fascinating was the story of one lady, who we will call Jane, who lives in Australia. She has had so many strange experiences, from recalling a past life as her grandfather's sister, to fleeing an extremely haunted apartment she lived in as an 18-year-old. One of her most interesting stories was when she helped a man named Anthony Quinata. Anthony is the owner of a doll named Harold. Harold is an allegedly haunted doll, so this really piqued my interest after hearing the stories of Robert and Annabelle, two other famous haunted dolls. She had taken an interest in Harold after watching the Island of the Dolls episode of Ghost Adventures. She joined the group on Facebook, where discussions take place about Harold. There's a lot of uncertainty involving the origins of the doll, and Anthony is continually trying to piece together its history. He found that it's possible the doll may have originally came from Australia. This is where Jane came in, as she volunteered to help, as Anthony's based in the States. As Anthony picked up leads, he would ask her to go and investigate over in Australia. It could be anything, from someone coming forward, saying that they had a doll that looked a lot like Harold when they were younger, or they knew someone else who did. To cut a long story short, as Jane was helping Anthony, she began having crippling stomach aches and blinding headaches, as did her eldest son, who would actually vomit because of it. Hospital tests were to follow, and her son were both given a clean bill of health. At the same time, her son was troubled by visions of a boy with no face that would prevent him sleeping at night. In the end, she had to withdraw from helping Anthony, and everything stopped. I decided that her story was a fascinating one, and did 3 episodes of Scary True Tales detailing her experiences. The third and final one telling of her experiences with Harold. When I told Jane I would include her experiences with Harold, she said that she would be surprised if nothing strange or frightening happened while working on the Harold episode. There are numerous reports of people suffering headaches, stomach aches, and having terrifying paranormal experiences, while merely reading Anthony's book about Harold, or even just visiting the website. I suspected that many of the physical symptoms were psychosomatic in nature, although I won't discount all cases outright. I was interested to see if anything did happen, and was almost expectant over the first few days. I soon forgot, though, and went happily about my business, until one Thursday night after returning from a relative's house. It was bedtime for my 2 children, aged 4 and 2, and I left them both playing with their toy trains in the dining room, as I went upstairs to grab their PJs. On my way downstairs, I stopped and talked to my wife, who was doing some housework upstairs. I was looking down, when I saw my daughter open the yard door and walk into the yard. My 2-year-old son followed behind her. As I shouted down, "Hey, what are you 2 doing?" My son shut the door and waved, saying goodbye. I quickly ran down to get my daughter back out of the yard, as I didn't want her outside so late, although I wasn't particularly worried, as she would not have gotten far in that time. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, out of the corner of my eye, I saw my daughter sitting on the floor still playing. Thinking one of the neighbor's children had entered and then left, I quickly looked into the yard, but found no child present, and our gate was still latched and too high for a child of my daughter's height to reach. My wife, who came to the top of the stairs, was not in time to see what appeared to be my daughter walking out the door, but did see my son shut the door and wave by. I sat down and explained to her that I saw our daughter walk out the door, so was puzzled to see her there. At this, my daughter became upset, thinking I was lying, and started crying, saying, "Daddy, I did not go outside." I won't lie, I immediately thought of the doll, especially after the warning from Jane, and reading the testimonies of others. It was as if another entity had impersonated my daughter. After feeling initially reluctant, I included this experience as a sort of footnote at the end of my video. One more thing happened a few days later, just after I uploaded the Harold episode to YouTube. My wife had been out with her friends, and on coming in, a draft blew open the bedroom door. She said, "Oh, hello, Harold." I chastened her for making a joke, as I previously warned that a lot of people who make jokes about him often find that something happens, ranging from having an accident to supernatural type experiences. She went downstairs and collected some supper from the kitchen, and as I heard her come back up the stairs, I heard a sort of noise like small metallic objects rattling. She asked me if I heard it too, as it had come from just behind her. It seemed to follow her up the stairs. I walked up and down the stairs before running up and down the stairs to see if I could recreate the noise, but was unable to. Luckily, nothing happened since, and I've put it behind me.
Number 3.
When I was a young child, I spent many a summers at my grandparents' house in LaSalle, Ontario. They had an old redwood cellar and angel brick house with a large woodland behind them. I played and made forts in the woods. This was the late 70s, early 80s, and even then time had stood still for years in these woods. Old scrap antique car holes were hidden among the vines. Streams filled with pikefish wandered through the woods. wild berries, grapes, and milk pods were abundant. The forest seemed surreal and stretched on forever. It was about 3 miles deep, and had a few scattered farm fields along the outer edges. Wonderful place to be as a young child. Besides the forest, the other thing that I remember about my grandparents' house was the grandfather clock that stood in the hallway. It had been made by my grandmother's cousin from a kit that was bought through Sears. I think it was built in the 1930s. So being 40 to 50 years old at the time, my grandfather would constantly be fixing it. It had 5 or 7 different chimes, and sometimes they worked, sometimes not. Often Granddad would be working on it, and I would get to see the innards. They were so complex with little gears and shafts, weights, springs, hammers, and chains. I can remember several times in my youth trying to make heads or tails of how the gears worked. They made no mechanical sense to me. The connections they made and the way they worked just did not seem to be functional, so it was a magic clock to me. Something that was always mysterious and beautiful to look at. Well, the years passed, and God collected my grandfather at a young age in his 50s. He had a very long run with a dreadful illness that had him bedridden for many years. When he died, the clock toned all of the chime selections at midnight for 3 nights in a row. Then, it just didn't work anymore. The clock did, but not the chimes. We all thought this was crazy, but the event passed without further incidents. Many years later, it came time for my grandmother to move out of the house that my grandfather had built. But she found a condo in Amersberg close to us and was quite happy. The clock was moved to the condo and no longer worked. It became a statue or piece of furniture to look at. Now, a funny thing happened. The person who moved into Grandpa's old house got to know the neighbor, who we were friends with. It got back to us that the new owners would wake in the night and hear a clock ticking. On a few occasions, they would even hear the hand movement cycle to move the hands. They traced the sound to the hallway, where the grandfather clock had once stood. This went on for about a year, and then eventually stopped after the new owners did a massive remodel of the house. To make this story weirder, a few years ago, we lost my grandmother. After the funeral, we returned to her condo, and in the middle of talking about the good old times, the grandfather clock chimed. It chimed all of the chime selections, one after another. We all looked at each other wide-eyed, as the clock was not working at the time. No ticks, no talks, nothing. And it had been many years since the clock had even sound. Regardless, we all had a kind of freak-out moment. The clock now rests at my mother and father's house. I spent many hours working with it to get the innards cleaned up and working again. We even had a clock guy come over and work with it to fine-tune it and replace the hammers. So now it works perfect. My mother uses it from time to time. Sometimes she will stop the clock to get a rest from the sounds, as it is a noisy clock when it is working. Every now and then it will start up by itself and give us all a wow moment. This clock has come to be dear to me. I often wonder if our family has a spirit connection to it, or if it is linked to the afterlife. Is it controlled by the ghosts of its former owners? I wonder a lot about that clock. Will it chime when my parents pass? Will it chime when I pass?
Number 4.
When I was 8 years old, I was staying with this lady in California, waiting for my dad to pick me up. A week passed, and he couldn't take off from work, so I stayed with the lady for a week. This lady had a son who was a cop, but he was never home. He worked night and morning shifts. She bought him a chubby baby doll for his birthday, and also dressed the baby doll as a cop to resemble him. He would always place it on his bed, and I would always want to play with it, but the lady wouldn't allow me to. She also had many more dolls, including these 4 beautiful porcelain dolls. She allowed me to play with those dolls. One night she was making dinner, and I was on the couch in the living room, playing with the dolls while the TV was on. While playing with the dolls, I accidentally broke off one of the doll's legs, and I had the other 3 dolls sitting side by side next to me. I didn't want to tell the lady what I had done, but I knew she was going to find out anyway. I placed all the dolls laying down on the couch. I took just the one doll I'd broken the leg off of. When I got to her and told her what I had done, she said it was okay, and that she would just glue it back. I was so relieved, until I went back to the couch. I left the dolls laying down on the couch, and when I came back, all 3 dolls were sitting up on top of a cushion that belonged to the couch. I was a bit creeped out, so I rushed back to the kitchen and told the lady, and she said I'd probably left them like that. I know for sure I didn't leave them on top of a cushion. Weird things started to happen, like the pillows of the couch being found on the floor and doll shoes next to them. I told the lady the dolls might have been mad because of what I did to the other doll's leg. 2 nights before I left her house, in the morning, we placed the dolls in a plastic bag on a chair in the kitchen before we headed out to go to the grocery store to go buy fruit. When we got back from the store, we went straight into the kitchen to put the bags away. What we both saw scared the living life out of us. When we got to the kitchen, we saw the dolls out of the plastic bag, and one of them was in between the bars of the chair, the other 2 laying down stacked up on each other. The lady then said it might have been her son who came home early from his morning shift. She went to check his room, but his bed was still made, with his chubby cop baby doll laying in his bed. Eyes wide open, she told me not to play or touch the dolls, because something might be wrong with them. The day I was finally leaving, she said she was going to burn the dolls to end whatever was going on with them. Till this day, I don't know if she did or not, because I lost contact with her.
Number 5.
This story relates again to the residential home I worked in. I cared for a lady who, as her health declined, was moved to various rooms in the home to suit her particular needs at the time. This obviously involved a lot of furniture and clothes removal, and repositioning in the new rooms. But the thing myself and my colleagues noticed was the atmosphere or feel of every room she occupied just felt off. No cold spots or anything we could put our finger on, but just a general feeling of something not quite right. And no matter which part of the building or which room she was in, the feeling was always there. One evening we had to move her furniture to what was her final room in the home. She had a very large, heavy mahogany chest where a lot of her clothes were kept. We had to empty this in her wardrobe before moving them. So after dinner, myself and my colleague began removing all the clothes from the chest and wardrobe and taking them to the new room. We moved the bed, chest, wardrobe, etc., set up the room and began replacing all the personal items, clothing, and all that stuff back into them. My colleague picked up a stack of shirts to replace in the drawer of the chest, and as she bent to place them inside, they toppled and fell out of her hands onto the floor. As she picked them up, she suddenly stopped, turned to me, and asked, "What the hell is this? Have you seen this before?" I turned to her, holding a piece of pink gauzy material in one hand and a small doll in the other. She held the doll out towards me and said, "This was wrapped in the material. What is it?" I stepped forward to look. The only thing I can describe it as is a voodoo doll. It had a pale-colored material body, trousers, an embroidered jacket open at the front, a long lock of hair hanging from its head, and a strange symbol that looked kind of like a child's drawing of a boat on its chest. It also had a drawn-on face with small beads for eyes. It was small, 1.5 inches in length, but very detailed. Looking at it gave me the creeps, to be honest, but I tried to laugh about it and said, "Never seen it before. Don't want to see it again. Wrap it back up, put it back, and say sorry for dropping it on its head." My colleague laughed and said, "You're right," then to the doll, "I apologize for dropping you," wrapped it up and replaced it where she thought it had fallen from. We both felt a bit nervous, so finished up and left the room. We spoke to our team leader about it, as neither of us had seen it before, and all personal items are documented when brought in. She could find no mention of the little doll in any of the residents' paperwork, but added it as a footnote to the existing list. I often wonder, was it a voodoo doll? I've never seen anything like it before. The detail was very intricate, from the face to the embroidery on the clothing, and the symbol on the chest was very weird. Was this why there was always a strange atmosphere in our rooms? Does anyone have any ideas? Hey guys, I hope you're having a good day. Or night. I hope I'm uploading enough for you. It's been fun to try and come up with different themes for my videos. The paranormal videos, though, are a bit easier to do that with for now, compared to things like Let's Not Meet. On the subject, though, do any of you have any paranormal experiences that stick out? I can tell some of my own in some of these outros, I guess. Should I? As I said in an older video, they are too short to include in the compilations themselves, so I'm thinking if I should share one story per outro. I think that sounds fun, yeah? Anyway, yeah, tell me your thoughts in the comments, and if you want me to read a story of yours in a future video of mine, email me at am_maverick@comcast.net. If I can, I'll try to find some way to put it in an annotation or something, but it'll also definitely be in the description.
If it's fear you're after, welcome home.